All right, the Boomerang Atom or the FTL Innovations Lancer is coming along very well. This video, we're going to be primarily focused on all of our surfaces, vertical stab, horizontal stab, wings, plus some other mixed mash of things. Let's dive back in to this very cool aircraft. All right, guys, first video, we got a bunch of details, glue joints, all that stuff sorted out. So we're gonna plug away at the surfaces here. Now, I'm doing a bit of a mix mash of different servos because we've got some servos. We needed some servos, so I've kind of got things figured out here. We're using these are the older 8911s. So we've got one of these brushless ones. I had one brushless one that we're going to be using on the rudder. So this one's already laid in place. It fits very nicely in there. There's a little pocket for the servo lead to come out. And also that servo lead is going to come to this opening right here because this opening lines up with that on the fuselage. And we've already got one of our plugs and stuff, which basically is a drop-in to that location. So super cool. So that's the servo we're using on the rudder. We are going to be using the MKS 747s on the horizontal stab. We will be using the 599 SLs on the ailerons. We'll be using we've already talked about this one, this KST mini servo, or it's a standard servo, but it's a small version on the nose steering. These are going to be our vectored thrust servos, so some of the big 8911s. And then we will probably either use these guys on the flaps or we'll use another larger servo. Not sure about that yet, we'll figure that part out. But that's the servo layup that we're doing. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna get this servo screwed down. I think we can get the arm installed when the servo's in place. So we wanna be able to put that in, install it, turn this enough to do up our pinch screw. So I'm going to confirm that. If that's going to work, we'll screw this servo down in place and start to get our vertical stab sorted out. So while we're doing that, we're also thinking about our tank. So I'm going to get this sanded out. Now I'm doing something a little bit fun in this plane. It's not too crazy, but it's just something different. I've been thinking about this since last night on what we're going to do. And I could do standard gray in the fuselage. The problem with standard gray, it doesn't really match anything on the aircraft. So here's what I'm thinking. We do the entire inside of the fuselage in black. Now it's going to be I think a semi-gloss black or we'll take a look at the paint that I have. It's kind of a unique paint as well too. So we're going to do the entire inside black and we're going to do our accents in white. The black is going to be cool because, it's very minimal on the aircraft, but we've got the black Atom logo. That's what I was thinking about. But the black is a nice way to finish this guy off. But then we do our tank painted white. I think that's going to be awesome and it's going to look great. And then we do our main tray here, whether we install it up top or down below, we also do the main tray in white. So that I think will be a nice accent and a nice setup for this aircraft. So that's the plan. And this is the black that I'm planning on using. So this is something I recently found. I've used the clear coat from these guys, but this is a 2K mix at the nozzle product. So everything mixes at the nozzle. Usually with 2K products like this, you puncture it, you shake it up, you've got a few hours to use it. But this one mixes at the nozzle, and this is a satin black. That's what I'm thinking about. So it'll be not flat, one step above flat, but it's jet black, and I think this is what we're going to use inside the fuselage. So excited to give that a try. This stuff works well. I've used their clear coat as well, but this is what we're putting on the inside of the aircraft. All right, so our servo's screwed in. You can see there, that's all done. We've got our arm installed nice and centered. Now, I don't think we need to use the outboard hole. I think we can use the inner one, which is a 1-inch dimension, 25 millimeters. So we will chop that off. I should have chopped it off beforehand, but I didn't, so we'll do it afterwards. But the servo arm choice does limit our use of the stock hardware. So we will be varying that a little bit. The stock ball joints are like a 2.5 screw or whatever that is. And this particular JR arm is a 3mm arm, so you can see there It obviously doesn't work with the threads. All of the rods on the kit are, looks like 3mm rods, so we'll be using these rods. I may put some carbon over top of the rods, so we'll check that out as well. But that gives you an idea of what we're doing as far as the hardware end of things. All right, so we've got our linkage length and everything all set up here. We're nice and centered. I've got my servo travel limited, so when we go to full deflection here, we're not touching anything. We get full deflection on the vertical stab. So the 1-inch arm is perfect, or the 25mm hole is perfect. And definitely don't need carbon on this. I'm gonna put some carbon on here, just a carbon rod in between these two, just for looks. That's the only reason I'm doing it. These control rods are nice and stiff. This is also the longest one in the kit. So all of the other control rods here are very short, so that should be no issues with these control rods. Look how tiny those things are. Awesome. So nice and small, that works great. So what I'll do in this case is I'll take my carbon rod, hold it up against this finished length here, cut it off, and well, obviously we got to take one of the ball joints off to fit it, but that is what we're looking for. All right, so our vertical stab rudder is all done. I used my Dremel and chopped that guy off, so now we're nice and shorter on the servo arm, and this gives you an idea of our movement here. So there we go. So that's max deflection, and we still got some space on the ball joint to surface. So that is done. We've added washers on there, another good idea for ball joints, just to keep the ball joint from popping off. So anyways, that's done. Now we're going to, generally I would use an ashlock connector on this type of setup, but because of the design here with the aircraft, I'm just going to use one of my servo plugs. So this holds the female side of the servo plug. It's almost the right size here. If we take an X-Acto blade and just clean that up a little bit, or a file, this is going to drop right in place, which is going to be perfect. So I'm going to get my servo lead done up. Probably going to run these servo leads just down and forward, so I'm just going to leave an excess amount of wire. Now when I'm doing servo leads like this, I'll run them, I know I'm putting my equipment in this area, so I'll run them to here, so then we'll chop them down and make the correct size servo lead. All right, so we did up our lead, we got that installed, and this is just glued into place. The yellow mark signifies which way is our signal, or white, or signal wire, and that's installed. So I think this is gonna clear the pre-made opening right here just perfectly. We can also increase the size of that if needed, but I think it's gonna be perfect. Now we don't wanna get too far ahead of ourselves with running wires. We can't actually run this wire forward because we still need to paint the fuselage. So I'm going to pull, once I get the pipe and turbine and everything figured out, and I pull that stuff out, I'm just going to bundle this wire up in this area because I'm not focused on painting this area, so just keep that in mind. Now for this plane, all of our wire that I'm using is the standard PowerBrox premium wire. So this is the lighter version wire. Now we generally use maxi wire for pretty much everything, but when we're concerned about weight, we are using the standard wire. Now both wires are amazing, they're both great, but in this case I've got a brand new roll of the regular premium wire, so that's what we'll use on the Atom. All right, so next thing we want to spend a bit of time focusing on is getting our cutouts for our pipe and turbine done, so that stuff can just drop in place. We want to get those done before we paint the fuselage, so they're nice and clean and finished. Ultimately, it's not super important because when we do those little notches for like the nuts, I mean, it'll be invisible anyways. So, but we'll just get that done now and get it out of the way and finished. So spacing wise, we're pretty much good here. We've got a decent amount of space in the front section there between the turbine. That turbine is going to drop down a little bit further, so that starter motor is going to be fairly close to the wing tube, but we'll have clearance there, and there'll be clearance in between the FOD screen and the wing tube as well. So I'm happy with that location. As far as depth inside the bell mouth here, I'm going to pop this turbine out. We're going to measure the bell mouth, and what we're looking for is a 50% mark on the exhaust cone sitting in the bell mouth. So in a situation like this, if you've got a 3-inch bell mouth, which is pretty common for these guys, you want the end of your tail cone of your turbine to be sitting at the 1.5-inch mark inside the bell. Now that starts where the stainless or regular pipe meets the bell mouth. So our dimensions here, we can measure it on the video. We are roughly 2.5 inches. So 1.25 inches is how far we want to be inserted into the bell mouth. So you can see there in 1.25 inches. And I think, just eyeballing it here, that setup is exactly 1.25 inches. So that position works well. I think that's ideal. So what I'll do is I'm just going to put a couple of Sharpie marks here where we need to add our little notches for our nuts to clear. We know that the nuts on the pipe or the bell mouth are right in front of this structure right there. So we'll get those sorted out. So let's get our turbine and pipe ready to mount. All right, so we did our notches for the pipe and the turbine using the Dremel, some hand files, and that turned out absolutely beautiful. So everything just dropped in place very nicely. I'll show you a view up the tailpipe here, but I think that is going to be perfection. So the other thing with that, the front of the pipe dropped down a little bit. Now it's not touching our vertical stab tube anymore. This pipe is going to come up just a little bit so we're nice and centered in that rear former. But if you look at the turbine there, everything sits beautifully. That is awesome. Good fit. All right, guys, so I took the tape off the tank and we had our kind of our wide patch of high sol on the tank. Sorry, Nez. And so anyways, I took my my plane and my mini hand plane and cleaned up all the high sol. So basically took all the excess off except the little joint holding everything together. Blew in here with my mouth. There was like one little pinhole, actually. I was expecting it to be way worse. I think it was that one right there. Just dropped a little bit of CA in there just to seal it up, and it looks like she's all good. So that's good. So what we'll do now is we're going to sand this joint down. So there's a little bit of an inconsistency there. That's fine. We'll deal with it. We will smooth this tank out before we paint it, but we need to glass this section. So we want to sand, you know, a couple inches on each side and get this ready to install epoxy and glass onto. All right, so we got 2 layers of 3/4 ounce glass cloth installed on the tank joint. You can kind of see the glossiness there, so we're just going to let that cure and do its thing, and I think that's going to work out well. Once this is on, I actually blew into the tank and pressurized it again, and I didn't see any air bubbles or anything, so rudimentary, yes, but it works, and when we paint this tank and sand it all out again, it will should look great. So we've got the fuselage sitting over there. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the fuselage onto the workbench and we're going to get it prepped and ready to paint the inside. All right, so we got our surfaces off the tail section. We've pulled everything out of the fuselage, and I took some 90-degree stock, I guess, I don't know what you call it, triangle stock, I think, and glued that against the tank. So now when the tank sits in here, it is absolutely solid side to side, so simple addition for the tank. So what we're going to do is prep everything off and get it ready to spray. All right, so fuselage interior is all painted black, just like we talked about, so it's the 2K black paint. So basically we focused obviously on the front end, and then we focused on the back end. So looks good. I'm going to pull the prep off now and we'll see what it looks like against the white. Should be nice and crisp and clean. All right, so just as I'm pulling the prep off the underside of this fuselage, just got me thinking, like, look how flat the underside of this fuselage is. It almost looks like a boat. It's crazy flat all the way down the fuselage. I think that's going to contribute to some pretty awesome flying characteristics. All right, so all of our prep is off. I think it looks really good. Happy with that. Glad I didn't put the speckles in there. I think just the black looks really nice. And I mixed up some polyester filler, and we filled our cutouts here for the top board. Now I've pretty much decided now that I'm going to put this top board in the original location up top here. We're going to use this guy down below. As far as the polyester filler goes, this is basically what I use. So icing, polyester finishing putty, and of course it's 2 parts. This is nice because it sands really nice and it's quite flowy. It's quite liquidy when you mix it up. You've got about 5 minutes to work with it, and then it starts to kick off. So we went a little bit heavy there so we can sand that out. And once these are sanded and ready to go, we'll be priming these white. All right, so just priming our trays. So while I'm waiting for those to cure to put our next coat on, I'm going to put our vertical stab on for the last time. So scenario like this where I'm not using an ashlock connector and I'm just using a standard servo connector, we can do this a couple different ways. I could use foil tape on here, but I'm just going to use a little tiny dollop of shoe goop. So this is hardly anything at all, but it is going to be enough to hold that guy in place and make sure it doesn't come loose. So we're going to do the exact same thing on our horizontal stabs too, just because the cutouts that are designed for the horizontal stabs here are also exactly the same as that. So it just makes sense to do it that way. So we're going to pop this guy down. No need for Loctite on the fixing bolts because there's lock nuts on there. So we're going to get those guys tightened up. Vertical stab is done. So we've got the fuselage set aside. We're moving on to our horizontal stabs or elevators. And these are a very, very slick setup. I like this. The MKS HV747 fits in there beautifully. There's a nice little pocket on the top side of the surface, the underside of the servo. And we can tuck this wire, just keep tucking it in there, and it will completely disappear, which is going to be awesome for our setup. So that's not screwed in yet, but it is in place. The servo arms we're using for pretty much all the surfaces after this is going to be the KST servo arm. This is a nice servo arm with a M2 thread here, which is going to, I think, work with those stock hardware. So, but anyways, that's what we're using. The outside hole is 25 millimeters, 1 inch. So that's going to be another perfect setup. So we're going to plug the servo into our receiver, get that centered, and get the servo arm installed. All right, so upper tray, lower tray, they're painted, not clear coated yet. I'm going to wait a couple days to do the clear coat, but those are done and looking crisp and professional. Now we've got the back end all finished up here, so our elevator surfaces are completed, and we've got our plugins here on this side and the other side ready to install our horizontal stabs. So I've put the same connector that we used on our vertical stab, so that's installed. We've got the signal marked, and we've got our wire leads right now just coming out the tailpipe of the aircraft. Now, the wires are marked, so I don't know if that will show up on camera there, but I've got each lead marked. And I'm just going to put this lead together just so you guys can see what it looks like. So nice and straightforward. The servo lead here tucks right in beside that servo, so it's just a nice, snug, minimalistic fit. So nice, clean, simple install. So I'll just show you exactly what's going on here with this. So we'll just tuck that all the way in. We've got the servo the correct direction. Now, I'm just seeing how tight these are. I mean, those are pretty snug. I'm not worried about that coming loose. I want to make sure these elevators or horizontal stabs are removable, so I'm not going to put any goop on those guys. And that's it. So now we're going to do our 2 screws up from the underside. Very simple installation. I like that a lot. All right, so back end wiring is all completed. I'll kind of show you the path here. So our right elevator comes down to the clip. Our left elevator I ran across to that same clip. Basically, I wanted all of the surfaces to run down the same side. Then we've got it going forward. The rudder comes down and joins with all those guys, and then they run down the right-hand side of the fuselage. So down here in the bottom corner, underneath the engine mounting, kind of tucked away from the engine and pipe and everything, and then we just come underneath the tank. So obviously the tank's going to be there and it's going to hide all this stuff. And then our wiring for the wing, which is this right here, comes right through here, and that's going to follow the same path going forward. So I did run the back ones inside of snakeskin. That is something I like to do for the back end ones and the wing ones as well too, just because it's going across formers and through a bunch of things, so we want to keep that protected. So our back end is now completed on this aircraft. So actually we can drop our pipe in now, which is exciting, very exciting. All right, I'm really digging that white tray. I think that looks really good, nice and classy. We still have some more finishing to do on it, but that's gonna look awesome. So we've got our leads all run forward like I mentioned, and pipe is installed. So that worked out very well. Quite simple to install. The pipe just slides in from the front section there, and then there is 4 of these little tabs that come with the former kit to install. So those are pretty simple. You're just getting that as centered as possible. And yes, we'll go in and paint those black, but those are looking good. So that's all centered and looking wonderful. And just looking at this now, that lead for the left elevator goes right across where our vectored nozzle might need to go. So we may have to make a little bit of a change there. Hopefully we can just sneak it through. I don't know if that'll show up on camera, but right there, right above the vectored nozzle rod is where it needs to sneak through. So we'll see. Not a big deal to go in there and just modify stuff, but yeah, good progress today. Back end is complete. All right, so we've moved the Atom onto our Lukey stand, and we have put some stuff back on the table. So our tank is all done. You can see there, I think when I blow into it, it feels like it's holding pressure. So we won't worry about that till the very end, but I think we're all good. So we're gonna sand this and get it ready to paint. So obviously we've got a fairly rough texture on here with our epoxy and everything. So we'll try and get that as smooth as possible. I don't know if I want to do any filling on this. I might do some filling on the top, but I'm not going to do any on the sides. I mean, pretty much the top is the only visible part, and I want this to look nice and smooth. So probably fill the top here with polyester filler, but first step is we need to get it all sanded out anyways. All right, polyester filler installed and sanded out, and everything looks nice. So obviously we don't have a lot of filler left, but just filled in this kind of ugly looking stuff up top on the tank. So looks good. Hopefully everything is good. We're ready to prime this thing and paint it. So we're gonna start off with priming it. The one key with priming it is before we prime it, obviously we've got to put our indicator line on the front of the tank. So I may do 2 of those guys, I think. Yeah, I'll probably do 2 strips here on the front, so we'll prep those off, prime everything, paint everything, and that'll come off. And then I may install a black stripe down the center of the tank to kind of jive with our tray action here. So we added some black details on the tray, and we've got some special stuff that's gonna go right here and some special stuff that's gonna go right there. So stay tuned for that. It's a little bit of humor, a little bit of fun, and I'm enjoying putting this plane together and having fun with it. All right, so our tank is primed. We're letting that cure for about 30 minutes, and then we are going to put our white paint on there. Turned out good. Did 2 stripes here for the fuel indicators, and I think I'm pretty much going to put a black stripe right down the center, I think is the coolest thing to do. So while we're waiting for the paint to cure, we are going to prep the gear for installation. So one of the key things, and I talk about this so often, I feel like a broken record sometimes, but it is extremely important to Loctite all of your gear components. So on these landing gear, you're going to Loctite your side screws on the actual gear itself. And then looking at the landing gear, you're going to do your fasteners for the wheel tire combination, and probably that guy right there holding the axle pin in. And that should be good. This one here, I don't really know the purpose of it. If you take this one out like I did on the front here, it just exposes the shaft and the spring assembly. So maybe that's like a lube port or something. But yeah, I'm just going to Loctite those guys in place. They were Loctited, but I've got to redo that one. So if you look inside there, it'll just be black, and that's because the actual shaft that moves in and out is just on the bottom part of that hole. So if you do tighten that screw up, you actually can't compress your landing gear at all. So just a little fun fact for you. So we're going to get these things serviced and ready to install. All right, other thing you want to do with your front landing gear is you want to pull the gear off, and there is 4 fixing bolts on these JP landing gear that hold the servo plate in place. You want to make sure you Loctite those guys as well too. While we're here, I just check our Torx fitting there that holds the main steering pin in place. And when you do put this back together, just pay attention that there is flat spots already existing on the nose pin. All right, and just like that, tank is all painted and completed. I was just going to do a stripe initially. Part of the reason I did this is this side, the white didn't go on so well, so this was my my covering was the point of that. So anyways, that's done. We're going to let this cure for a couple days, and then we'll clear coat this with 2K clear along with the tray as well too. So we'll just set that aside. Should work great. Obviously, we've got good visibility through our little fuel level indicators there, and we'll still be putting our vent fitting probably, I don't know, probably in the top or something. But so while we were working on the landing gear, I figured I would get my front servo here installed. The manual covers this very well, and it's pretty straightforward, just like most landing gear systems now. So we've installed our arm, used Loctite. Length of this hasn't been adjusted yet, but servo has been installed, and looks like we're pretty stinking close. So if we lay that gear down flat, lay that wheel down flat, our length here is very close. So what I'll do next is put my servo arm on. This is a KST. The furthest out hole is 20 millimeters. So we'll install that, and that will leave the arm sitting sort of like that-ish. So we'll plug that into the receiver, get the arm installed, and then get this fastened to the arm. All right, so nose steering's all centered, perfectly set up and everything, and working wonderful. So that's full movement, 100% in each direction. So I suspect we'll probably dial that down, but that is our starting point, and front gear is ready to install. Now, next thing we're going to work on is continuing with the back end moving forward, which means that we need to get our vectored thrust sorted out. So the first servo we're going to install is our yaw servo, which is our servo that mounts beside the pipe. So that mount's already done. We just need to get our servo set up and, I guess, installed in the plane, and then we'll work on our rod length, linkage, and everything, and kind of go from there. So it's going to be first for me, but I think the yaw is pretty straightforward as far as positioning and path and everything. The pitch one, which mounts to the ceiling or the roof of the plane, is a little bit more complicated because you've got to get the mount sorted out. So we'll figure that out after, but we're going to do our yaw servo first. All right, so we got our threaded rod glued into our carbon arms or carbon rods. A little tip here for you. So these carbon rods are quite smooth on the inside as well as the outside, so it's basically the same finish on the inside. So when you glue something like this, you'd always want to roughen up the outside, right? So you want to do the same thing to the inside. So I took a small round file and just stuck it in the end and just basically sanded out the carbon as much as I could on all 4 ends. And then another cool tip is when you glue your one side in, you should be using enough Hysol that when you push the other side in, it actually pressurizes this tube That's the reason for the orange tape, is I pushed one side in and then the pressure just pushed the rod back out. So yeah, you've got to use tape to hold it in place, but we've got those glued and ready to go. So those two things I think definitely qualifies as a tip time, and this tip time has been brought to you by trusty bent screwdriver. All right, I know I'm really focusing on these trays and tanks and stuff, but I think that looks so good with them installed. I know it doesn't make the plane fly any better, but dang, I love when I pull the canopy off and a plane looks outstanding. That looks fantastic. What a gorgeous aircraft, and that tray layout is beautiful. So while I had some high sol mixed up, I did up one of my plugs here. This plug is for the nose steering, so the servo sits right here. We've got the coily wire that's going to plug in right there, so that's high sol to this side. Use some CA on that side just to hold it in place. And then in the back there, we've got our first JR servo mounted, and that's the arm that was on the servo that came out of the bull, so I just kept it on there. The instructions kind of show the output shaft the other direction, but it doesn't really matter as long as you get your arm done the right length. So that's why I've got it laid out that way. So that servo is ready to go. So we're going to let these guys cure, and once they're cured, we'll install them. And it is New Year's Eve right now while I'm working in the shop. And if you look at the clock right there, we just passed midnight. So it is officially 2025. Thank you guys for the support. I hear fireworks outside, and Happy New Year to you. This video is going to be airing later or a week into the new year, but regardless, Happy New Year. Thank you for supporting the channel. Thank you for watching my videos, and we're going to call it a night, and we'll come back tomorrow. All right, so pulled the tape off of our rods this morning, and those are all good, nice and solid, and got the yaw rod installed in the plane. So I'm also running a nut on the ends there so we can lock them down. So with that kind of centered on the nozzle, you can see back here that kind of left enough room to install a ball joint. So I'm going to get the ball joint installed next, and we'll get that kind of positioned and screwed into the servo. I'm also going to plug the servo into my receiver so we can get that centered as well. All right, so we got the servo end just placed in place. And so our double check here is we can take a spare carbon rod and hold it up on the nozzle. We can see that we're almost touching this horizontal stab right there on that side. And the left side, we've got about an 1.25 inch, 1.5 inch gap. So I still need to tighten that rod up a little bit to pull this over to make it level. All right, so we got 3 turns in, and we are looking good. Awesome. So pretty even there. If we tilt that up. Actually, it's going to make more sense to do it on when this is level, because if we rotate it up, there maybe those holes might be off-centered just a little bit. So we'll just give it the visual check. Maybe we have to go in another turn or two. Yeah, go in a little bit more. Anyways, one of the things I was thinking about is when you start this plane and the pipe heats up, it's also going to change length on the pipe. So we may need to do a little bit of sub-trimming while the engine's running and everything's hot, because obviously things are going to get longer as they get hotter. All right, so we're nice and centered there on the yaw, and I'm going to get it fastened down on the servo side. You can see there how things are going. So we're just going to, I'm going to put a washer on top of that ball joint and get that fastened down. All right, so prepping our plates to install here for the pitch vectored thrust. You can see the plates are not really level, they're kind of flexy. So what we're going to do is we're going to glue these two together with some CA, and then while it's curing, before we kick it off, we're going to push it down so it'll be nice and straight. And there's not a huge bend to it, it's just got a little bit of warp, which is pretty typical for any plywood. So we'll just install lots of CA everywhere. Now the instructions say that there is a big plate and a small plate. In our case, the plates are identical, which is fine because you can make a bit of an angle there anyways to fit the fuselage best. You do really have to fit this in place because there's not a ton of room for the control rod to move. So it's got to be a fairly accurate fit, and that'll come down to, you know, maybe some fine sanding on the angles here. So there we go. So nice and solid and flat. So we'll take our hardware here and we're going to get the rest of the hardware installed as shown in the manual. Now, this may be sort of hard to show you, but the manual shows that control rod going through on the right-hand side, but it also shows our yaw servo on the other side. We are going to run our rod through that side, and the reason is there's a little bit more clearance on that side, and it just fits better. You know, there's a little bit more give, basically. So it really doesn't matter which side you fit it on. Just pick the side that fits best. All right, so I've got to say that that was probably the worst part of all of this, was getting that servo hooked up to the rod, but it's done. So what we'll do now is we're going to plug both of our yaw and pitch servos in, and we're going to spot glue that plate in place with some CA. What that does is that allows us to get it positioned where we're happy with it. Once it's positioned and everything, then we'll go in and high sol it. That shouldn't be too tricky with just a long extension, but that is the plan to get that top plate installed. All right, so everything's tacked in place with CA. We've checked our movement and it is good. So what we'll do now is I'm going to mix up some high sol and we're going to get that glued in place. On the top side, we're going to use like a long screwdriver. On the bottom side, we'll use our finger and make a nice fillet. I did end up going with the 1.5 inch servo arm. I feel that it fits better. It also allows the rod more movement and also to stay away from the plate. When I originally installed it in the 1 inch hole, so the next hole in, as kind of shown in the manual, looks like there was a bit of interference. So anyways, your results may vary. All right, not super pretty, but functional, and that plate is now glued in place. So we're going to leave that be to cure. And while we're working on epoxy and letting things sit, I'm going to also glue in our 2 battery trays on each side. So we do need to sand the fuselage, get rid of the paint. That's an important step. So just going to use my Dremel, get rid of the paint in the glue locations, and we will get our 2 battery trays installed. Now these battery trays are available on our website. This is the single or double version, so most lipos you could stack 2 if you wanted to, or 1 sits in there nicely flat. So this is what we are going to install. I think on the website I've got them only in black, but this is PETG carbon fiber in gray. I kind of print that for my own stuff. But that is going to sit right like that. All right, so battery holders are glued in place like normal. We used high sol to glue them in place, spot glued them with some CA. We've also got our battery plugs here as well too. These are XT60 plug holders. These are available on our website. We've got red for turbine power, black for receiver power. So this is 2-cell LiPo, 3-cell LiPo. That's the color differentiation. Last thing here that I did is the tank fixing. So it was a bit of a pain, but it was possible. I kind of had my hand underneath here and got some little wooden tabs glued onto the tank. So those little wooden tabs prevent the tank from moving forward backwards. The 90-degree stock that we glued in before we painted everything keeps the tank from moving side to side. So what we want to do here is we want to glue these things on as well. We're going to avoid this and that, and same thing on this side because that is going to sit against the opening, and we want to put high sol in this area to make sure that these don't come off. All right, and that wraps up video number 2 in the Atom build series. This thing's a beautiful aircraft. I'm impressed with it so far. It's going together very well. The vectored thrust was an interesting challenge to set up, but ultimately really not that difficult. As I mentioned, the top servo up there was probably the most difficult part of this project so far. So we've got some cool ideas and little tips and tricks coming up as we progress forward in the project. Have an interesting tank mounting system to come up with, so stay tuned for that. That will be video number 3. So in video 3, we're going to start to move into the wings, and that's going to be the large focus of video number 3. Thanks guys for watching the series. If you're interested in this aircraft, check out Boomerang Jets website. There's a link down below, and that's the location for this aircraft in North America. If you're in a different part of the world, this is also known as the FTL Lancer, the 2-meter version of the Lancer. So keep that in mind if you're located elsewhere. So thanks guys so much for watching and supporting the channel. I encourage you as well to check out the Lighter Side of RC After Dark. The After Dark is our live channel. We do live streams here from the shop, usually every 2 weeks. It's tons of fun. I enjoy it, and always have a good time while doing it. Thanks guys. We'll see you in the next video.